Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. This is Phil Stevens. You're on Iron Radio again. I am a powerlifter, Highland Games athlete, and strength coach.
Hey, it's Dr. Mike Janelson, Associate Professor of the Carrick Institute, creator of the Flex Diet certification, which will open again around mid-January 2024, and not snowy Minnesota. Maybe not a white Christmas, which is very odd.
This is Coach Durrell out of Strength Guild in Kansas City. Gym owner, coach, weightlifting coach, strongman lately. Just doing all the things.
All the things. And this is Lonnie Lowry. In an ornery mood today. I've got a PhD in this stuff. I was a bodybuilder. I've got the microphone on my chest, so I apologize. I'm trying not to bop the mic with my surgical boot elevated here. I do have some news, though, for everybody on this extended Christmas weekend, I guess.
There we go.
And it's kind of relevant, and I know Mike has some science news as well. The first thing I have here is from the International Journal of Obesity. I think Lonnie Ducote, who listens to us, he's going to be like, yeah, see, I wasn't that against artificial sweeteners when the World Health Organization condemned them. And it's a good point, because this pendulum just swings, man. This one is sort of in favor of non-nutritive sweeteners. So bear with me here. This is a little editorial that was written about the paper, Peter Rogers, Non-Nutritive Sweeteners and Body Weight Management, Another Brick in the Wall of Evidence. It says participants in the trial were men and women, and I looked, it was mostly women. And by the way, mostly not artificial sweetener naive, okay? Or I should say non-nutritive sweeteners, right? Because they're just defining this as less than 5 kcal in 8 ounces of fluid. So super low calorie, basically non-nutritive. Anyway, men and women with overweight or obesity enrolled in a weight management program of 12 weeks of weight loss and then 40 weeks of weight maintenance. So a total of 52 weeks. Outcomes at 52 weeks were published earlier this year. So they're comparing non-nutritive sweetened beverages with water. There was a weight loss of 6.3% at 12 weeks, which was maintained at 52 weeks at 7.5%, in fact. It says at 52 weeks, and here we go, at 52 weeks, the weight loss was statistically significantly greater for NNS, for the non-nutritive sweeteners, not for water. I walked into this just thinking it's going to be for water, right? No, it was the non-nutritive sweeteners. It's in fact, it was about 3 pounds, superior weight loss and maintenance of around 3 pounds. So 7.5 kg loss for the non-nutritive sweeteners, 6.1 for the water. And again, the context is part of a weight loss program, right? That 12-week program, they had the behavior change and some exercise and nutrition logs and all that stuff. It says, as well as achieving and maintaining successful weight loss, this new randomized controlled trial provides evidence of a small advantage for weight management of consuming non-nutritive sweeteners, sweetened beverages over water. I don't usually see this. And in the intro, it says that the data go back and forth, and they do. I started getting swayed more and more by the World Health Organization coming out and saying, listen, we've done a sweeping review. In general, we just don't support these. Now, digging into this paper, and I didn't do a super deep dive, but I wanted to see which artificial sweeteners, right? Which non-nutritive sweeteners. They don't tell you. In fact, even they say the data aren't freely available online. You have to ask the author.
What?
I'm like, oh. But
That's weird.
It did seem weird, but it did say 20 different brands. So I'm going to assume that includes, aspartame, sucralose, probably those two.
Probably just by the calorie cutoff.
Stevia. I can only think it's a sweeping sample of different ones. Like I'm hoping 90% of these weren't all from one, and I could be overlooking it. By all means, someone go look, if you want to dig deeper than I did, but it wasn't immediately apparent, even when I looked at the manuscript itself and not just the editorial about it. So International Journal of Obesity, November of 2023. So this leads me to a couple of things. One is I never completely ditched, and I think this was Lonnie Ducote's point, artificial or non-nutritive sweeteners. I never completely ditched them. I did get away from sucralose, which I championed for years, right? I think good scientist changes his or her opinions with new evidence. Some of the stuff on sucralose and DNA damage was no bueno. I've had intestinal polyps before. My brother did. I don't want to worsen that in any way, so I got rid of that. I don't consume a lot of Splenda. I don't panic if I have one, I don't think aspartame is the best approach. I try to just I use half a packet of stevia in my coffee, frankly. I do occasionally drink a diet cola of some brand. I didn't ditch them entirely because of the World Health Organization. And yet, I don't think there's probably a wellness person out there who's not going to say, listen, water is probably best. You don't need the caramel colors. There's some other issues. But when it comes to body fatness, body weight, this new paper suggests that they're probably just as good as water or maybe even slightly better, which I just found that kind of interesting, I guess. That brings me to one question, Phil, and I honestly have never asked you, and all you guys can chime in on this, obviously, but do powerlifters drink a lot of diet pop and stuff like that, or do they just drink sugary pop? Do they not even think about it? Because I'm thinking bodybuilders are probably usually calorie conscious. They don't want to chug the high fructose corn syrup and all that. But do powerlifters even care, Phil?
It depends on their weight class.
Oh, yeah.
You get some of the people in lighter weight classes, I think so. But oddly enough, and it has changed in recent years. Powerlifting used to be like people just slowly worked up weight classes. You didn't see people sticking around in like the 198s and things like that. So, a lifter's career generally had a upward trajectory of body weight. Based on their height. Like there's a good video about that Dave put out, and like somebody asking him, what would Joe Smith here weigh to be a good powerlifter? And he's like, he'd be super heavyweight. And they're like, why? Because he's tall. And that's just it. It was based on your height, kind of where you maxed out and weight class wise. So to get the best results, and that's one of those deals. It's like follow the. Don't look at the outliers. Sure, there's going to be outliers here and there in different weight classes that are lean and skinny, but across the history of powerlifting, it's the bigger, stronger person generally wins. And so, anyways, long story short, yeah, there are some people that do it, but most of them, most of them are just trying to get calories in any way they can.
Well, let me rephrase then. Let me rephrase for you specifically, Phil, because I know like when you were pushing for 300 and almost reached it, body weight wise, not like, not squat.
Yeah.
But so you're not a big fan of high fructose corn syrup and that kind of stuff. Did you just chug it down?
Yeah, if I had to, and I'd go to something else. Okay. Is my thing. I just didn't enjoy them. Like if I was going to drink a soda, it's a diet soda, personally. But so I didn't do that much when I'm gaining weight.
Interesting.
I would go to something juices and things like that. I don't know. I just never was a big fan of the. I drank. I'm a big proponent when you're gaining weight of drinking as many calories as you can.
Sure.
Because it's easy. But I would lean towards milk or juice or things like that. Lots of juice. There's big cartons of apple, grape, whatever. But that's just my own. I just wasn't a fan of it.
Right. Oh no, that's a good compromise. Yeah. So. There are people out there who would panic even about juices, but at least you're getting nutrients in not just like a, caramel color and useless, cola.
The crazy thing to me is always, it's the things that like people go to, like the average population sees as like healthy, like juices and things like that. Juices and like breakfast cereals and stuff like, get some Special K. Like powerlifters cram that shit down by the box when you're trying to gain weight. Breakfast cereal is amazing for gaining weight. And it's so easy to put down. You throw some whole milk in it and you can just cram in boxes of that stuff. It's easily digestible and
multivitamin mixed in,
Yeah, and I don't know why. Like whenever I ate a ton of fruit, if I ate a ton of fruit, I'd gain weight. Like it was easy to put down too, and it seemed like easily digestible and just You could just cram in a bunch of fruit, a bunch of sugars, and yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested. Some of our listeners, if they could chime in on our YouTube or send emails or whatever they want to do, and how they basically address the non-nutritive sweetener thing. Yeah. Because it's just become kind of a controversy. Generally, I think it's not nice to fool Mother Nature and all that kind of stuff, but to me, it's just trying to limit exposure to any one of these. Mm-hmm. Like throughout the 90s and early 2000s, it was basically aspartame. That was your choice.
Yep.
And then sucralose got more and more popular right about that time, and moving forward, I switched over to that, and now I just ditch that. I'll use stevia. I don't know. Just try not to poison myself and yet not drink sweetened beverages,
Yeah.
Do you think the reason the sweetened beverages was better, Lonnie, is because people were still wanting some sweeter taste? I didn't look at the study. I didn't see what they did for diet or whatever, but then that would offer them some sweeter items that obviously don't have many calories to it, as opposed to if you go with more, I hate the word natural, but like whole foods and, like you've talked about, moving to things that are more bitter, like you're actively trying to change somebody's taste so that they enjoy, more dark chocolate and coffee and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In fact, they talk about some of that. You're definitely, I know you didn't even read it, but you've read so many papers. You know where some of this is going to go in the intro. It says some of what they've shown, like they show there's no difference in whether or not you're naive to the non-nutritive sweeteners, et cetera, as far as the weight loss differences. It says this is contrary to the sweet taste confusion hypothesis,
right,
because it predicts that increased exposure to sweetness mismatched with energy intake should acutely undermine appetite control in that group, right? So they did take a look at that. They say the sweet tooth and the sweet taste confusion hypotheses are hard to test experimentally, though the evidence against them, including these results from this, it's called the SWITCH trial, all capitals. They have to make it an acronym, of course.
Yeah.
This is pretty pro artificial sweetener or non-nutritive sweetener. But they do address the sweet taste confusion hypothesis, and the sweet tooth hypothesis.
I was very acute too. It was like, hey, look at this mismatch in hormones from what we would expect. And,
right.
Which is interesting, but maybe like most things, maybe the acute stuff just doesn't transfer to chronic. But I know it's a messy topic too.
Right. No, I am in general agreement is you still have to train people away from wanting sickly sweet things all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I put half a packet of Splenda or half a packet of stevia in my coffee. Cause I want to taste the coffee. I like the taste of coffee. I like the taste of tea. Sometimes I don't put any sweetener at all. I do think that's probably a better approach though.
Well, I think it's a personal thing. That's like,
yeah,
I've just never been into super sweet stuff. Like, I'm one of those weird people that understands why, like, if you go to, like, a nice French restaurant or something, you're going to get a dessert the size of a 50-cent piece. It's like, that's plenty. That's plenty for me. But you put a fucking 6 loaves of garlic bread in front of me, and I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
I will eat them all.
Garlic bread's great.
Yeah, that's where I lean towards, is, like, the breads and starches and savory chips,
Biscuits.
Yeah. Then I'm in trouble, man. I'm a fat kid at heart when it comes to that stuff.
Right. Jarrell, what about you? Artificial sweeteners, or non-nutritive, I should say, because some are not as artificial.
I mean, I don't avoid them or but I also don't just take in much that would have it in there. With most of my clients, I will see what they're actually taking in as far as like on average. And then if it's like you need to go backwards with, like, let's say we're doing weight loss and something they have every day is like Coke, like going from Coke to like one step down to a diet or something like that can be effective. But I never would prescribe it, like encourage people to like have it in there. I think that might just be the nature of the sports that I coach, like weightlifting, between weightlifting, CrossFit and all that stuff. Like, I don't think it had a strong, like, I don't know. It was always against artificial sweeteners, so the culture is already like anti, like very much so. So I haven't had to skate uphill on that one very often.
Okay. It makes sense with like glycogen economy and stuff. If you're crossfitting your butt off all the time, you're always like glycogen depressed. And I remember, I think Joey Antonio was part of the paper, or at least he popularized it, that Coca-Cola, sugary Coke, actually was a pretty good rehydration and glycogen replenishment drink. It kind of sabotaged the whole Gatorade kind of concept. Like you need something special. I'm not saying during the event, but like after. It's concentrated sugar, and if you just burn through all your bodily carbs, that's probably pretty replenishing, you know.
Yeah. Endurance athletes would use that for years, and I think that was the study was on endurance athletes, if I remember right, would use kind of flat Coke after or sometimes during events if they didn't have anything else. So
yeah.
Yep. It's the carbonation that's the kicker. Like trying to slam a bunch of carbonated beverages right after a long run.
Yeah.
Oh.
Right. Yeah.
Oddly enough, I'll drink like sparkling water a lot to get carbonation, and it's like so I like that side of it. We'll buy these just sparkling waters. Basically, it's just frickin' water that's been shot with CO2, but you know, it's a different mouthfeel.
My best use case for any of that would be like in the neighborhood of like a strongman or weightlifting competition, where like, if I had to find a solution for an athlete going from snatch to clean and jerk, and it was something that they could tolerate well and get a lot in, like I'm struggling to get this athlete to take anything in.
Yeah.
Which is just tough after water cuts, like in that short period of time. Like that's the worst time to try and put stuff in, is like right after that water cut is over. And I struggle a lot getting people like lifters and stuff to just take something in. So if it's something they enjoy and, you know, we had to work around it in that way, like, but I don't know that I would still be, you know, on one side of the fence or the other with artificial. It's more about what you enjoy and what you tolerate that we can get in quickly.
Yeah. And for me, it's moderation. You know, I do like things, like I said, a little bit of sweetness in my coffee most days, not all the time. If I hand grind something and I have this amazing, you know, crema type floating on the top, I'm not putting anything in that coffee, man.
Yeah.
But, you know, regular like utility coffee, I'll do a little bit of that.
Utility coffee.
Hotel coffee.
Oh,
God.
I know, man. And then they have to use the Keurigs. I am not a fan. I don't know if I've ever come out against Keurigs, but I am here right now. It's wasteful, expensive.
Yeah.
I saw something recently that when you do it per pound, it's like $30-$35 a pound for the coffee.
That's expensive.
And you're filling landfills with plastic. Just don't. I don't know. Yeah. Like I've had students, I remember in the lab, I'm like, can you go make some coffee? And I know that's terrible. Advisors shouldn't be asking students to do menial tasks, but it was for everybody, including her. And I came back like 10 minutes later. She's standing in front of the coffee pot and she's like, Dr. Lowry, I don't know how to do this. And I'm like, like life skills, hashtag life skills. But then it occurred to me that all she's ever done is pop a expensive little plastic cup into a thing. Just can't make a pot of freaking coffee, you know? And she's an MD now, so she's smart. So it's not, I don't know. I hope she doesn't listen. One more piece of news, and I know Mike has one. This is interesting from Lab Roots. What are cannabis flavonoids? By Helene Kreisik, I believe it is. This is just sort of interesting. It says flavonoids are a group of plant compounds that have antioxidant, anti-inflammatory properties. Of course, they're in lots of fruits and vegetables and herbs, including cannabis. And I've never really thought, I mean, everybody talks about the entourage effect and all the different things that are in cannabis, and Mike's the real expert on this stuff, I think, but it says some researchers believe that flavonoids specific to cannabis may provide therapeutic benefits. And to me, when I go down this list, I'm most familiar with this because of coffee, but not just. Blueberries and coffee are my usual, you know, poster children for this kind of stuff. But antioxidant protection, again, these are the flavonoids in there. Anti-inflammatory effects, again, pretty standard. Pain relief, neuroprotection, cardiovascular health, and cancer prevention. Now, we've probably heard all those things about weed, essentially. But this is consuming sort of whole herbs, some of the stuff. It says some of the most common flavonoids, over 20 different types: apigenin, luteolin, camphorol, quercetin, like you might see, for example, in grapefruit or onions. Orientin, vitexin, isovitexin, canaflavin A, B, and C. So it says the levels vary according to growing conditions and the strain of the plant, et cetera, et cetera. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Now they're looking at sort of the nutrient composition a little bit more, and specifically the flavonoids. Again, it was just a recent piece, December 21st, right, through LabRoots. So spanking new stuff. Mike, in all of your journeys with cannabinoids and all that kind of stuff, have you ever heard much about sort of obviously the like neuroprotection, cancer protection, anti-inflammatory, pain relief? Have you ever heard that attributed to flavonoids specifically, or how does that work?
Not specifically, but in the cannabis plant itself, I mean, there's so many. God, there's well over 100 different cannabinoids. There's a couple more that have probably been developed or that we'll find in the future. There's terpenes, like you mentioned, the flavonoids. So there's tons of these different components. Like some of the newer literature, we'll call them collectively chemovars, but that's somewhat of an accepted term depending upon where you go. But just similar to, I always think of like, coffee, red wine production, and cannabis are all much more similar than people realize, with all the, active components and the different methods and extraction. And we want to try to get this one and not that one. And yeah, it's pretty fascinating. For a while, with a couple different companies I consulted with in the past, I was trying to get them to do more with the different components in cannabis, because after the Farm Bill, which allowed basically CBD, so if you had the plant compound that was less than 0.3% THC, it's regulated under the Department of Agriculture now. That's when we saw like the huge explosion of CBD, which a lot of it on the market was just bogus. But there's still just a whole immense legal gray area. I was working with a guy, I won't say who, that his facility was basically visited by the FDA, and the project we were working on was basically shut down. So they said that he could still sell within the state he was in, which did have legal medical cannabis, but they said he was not able to sell across state lines, I think was the final thing. And he was an FDA compliant lab, like GMP. Like, he's one of the rare people like trying to do everything 100% by the book, and was spending a shit ton of money to do it. So it's just, yeah. Even the other day I had a meeting product we're looking at, and one of the ideas we had was to look at different cannabinoids. The chemist we're working with is an expert in that area. And at the end of the call, we all kind of agreed that it's a cool idea, maybe at some point, but right now, because of the bitterness of them, the extra time that you would need to put it, especially in a beverage, not a capsule, and then also just, it's such a legal gray area, it wasn't worth the risk. So I think that's kind of the difficult part. But there are some very exciting projects that are coming out, both for pathologies, especially for the neurology area. I have an NDA, so I can't say what, but there's some super cool stuff that hopefully will come to fruition in that area. So I think it's a area of interest and a lot of research, and we'll hopefully know more in the future. And the very last part, I was part of a group called Citizen Green, which is in Canada. So in Canada, you can get a percentage of stipend from the government to use for cannabis if you're a veteran. So myself and a bunch of other people, Ryan Sprague, Jeff DePate, and a bunch of other guys, Rick, we just created a program that they go through, and it's just an education program. So they learn about cannabis, they learn about the different components, the pros, the cons, and then, basic stuff like, sleep, movement, and all that type of stuff too. And then the end goal of that is that hopefully we'll have some tracking on the back end through certain technology where they will fill out kind of quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis. So we'll know what kind of product they're getting, and then they'll fill out forms of how they feel and how they respond. And in theory, if we can scale this up to enough people, we would have this massive database to try to look for associations between different components within cannabis too.
Yeah, cool. Okay, you also had one other piece of information here about some breaking news with protein.
Yeah. So there's a brand new study from Dr. Jorn Trommelen. He is a PhD out of Dr. Luc van Loon's lab over in the Netherlands. And their lab's done some really, really fascinating work. They're one of the first labs to, I guess for lack of a better word, it's an isotope label, but radioactively, I put in my air quotes, label a protein that they gave to cows. The cows then made milk, which they then made into casein, which they then fed to people in an overnight protein feeding study. And then Luke's like, and then we woke him up in the morning with muscle biopsies. They did this probably 2015, I think. I might be wrong on the date. But they're a little different way to try to label where these proteins are going in the body. And so they've published a few studies on that. They just published one earlier 3 months ago. I did a short article on looking at the difference between whey protein overnight versus casein. The theory is that casein is very slow-acting protein, and then that would be better overnight. What they found was whey versus casein didn't matter at all. I think it was a 40-gram dose. And in the new study, they looked at giving people after a full body, pretty intense training session. These are 12 young, healthy men. They gave them either a placebo, which was just zero, so no protein, just water, 25 grams of protein, or 100 grams of protein. And this was basically this labeled protein. And they were able to look, it was actually a quad isotope study. So they're able to look at how much protein is used and how much is oxidized and kind of where it goes. And the short version is what they found is even after 12 hours, so a lot of the studies before had used up to 40 grams for only 6 hours. So even at 12 hours, they were still seeing increases in muscle protein synthesis in the 100 gram group, which to me was pretty surprising. Like based on some of the old data, I would have not expected that. And what was even more shocking is that they only saw oxidation usage, I think, at around 15%. So I would have thought before this study that if you gave that much protein, yeah, you're going to see a nice response. It may hang out for 4 or 6 hours, but probably would come back to baseline, and you would just see a lot of oxidation or people just burning through protein. Mm-hmm. And what we saw was it was actually, quote unquote, being used. It was directed towards the muscle, not a lot of oxidation. And yeah, and last part too is that from some of their previous work, one of the questions I always had is if you consume, let's say, 20 grams of whey protein, how much of that protein like physically ends up in your muscle tissue under like the best case scenarios, right? You're a young, healthy person, you were lifting, all that kind of stuff. And it's about 10%. It's about 2 grams gets actually deposited in the muscle. That was from their work. In this new study, because they used a similar method, from the 100-gram dose, 13 grams was estimated to be deposited into the muscle. That's much higher than I would have expected. But super interesting study.
So I got to update my casein recommendations.
Caveat with that too is that in this study they did use casein because this extraction method they use, like when they did the whey to do the study with the overnight people before, because whey protein is only like 20% of milk, the cost that it was to do it, he said, was just astronomical. Like to do the casein extraction was, I don't know how many thousands of dollars per serving. It was just bonkers. So in this study they did use casein, but because of that previous study they did, we don't think that if you used whey there would be any difference. Because I know a lot of people online are like, oh, it's because they used casein over 12 hours. That's why they saw the effect. And probably not.
Yeah. I think from a practical standpoint, I buy huge tubs of whey. Casein's an excellent protein. Whey's an excellent protein. But I drink tons of milk, which, as you pointed out, is 80% casein as far as the protein. So why am I going to buy... I'm not lactose intolerant. I chug milk, And so if I want some protein, I kind of go for the gusto and just knowing that whey protein's sort of king in a lot of ways, at least as far as rapidity of amino acids and all that kind of stuff, protein synthesis. But dairy stuff like milk also makes me sleepy. And I think this hits some people more than others. But having some protein before bed, especially casein, at least with me, and I don't know if it's some of the peptides or whatever. But yeah, at my age, you get a little less carb tolerant, and then
Sure.
mid-afternoon, I'm not going to have the cereal like Phil's talking about. I'll be in bed.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating stuff, though. All the dosing stuff, I was just going to say, they talked about the protein timing throughout the day, like if you break it up into 4 doses versus 1 versus whatever. So often studies like this, homeostasis just kind of ruins your clever little plan, where is there a specific dose a number of times a day, or whey versus casein at bed, all this kind of stuff. It just seems like often it comes out in the wash. It'd be nice to have some super specific quantitative plan, but we're kind of back to the old, just slam it in, take it in.
And that's the downside too. And Stu Phillips rightly pointed this out, is that this is a mechanistic acute study. And obviously, like his lab and a bunch of other people, Tyler and other people have done chronic studies to follow up these acute-based studies. And they do tend to follow the same trend, but it's not this one-on-one matching like, hey, we found this acute response, so this is definitely going to happen chronically. Like, we can't say that. And we know from the chronic studies, obviously, Lonnie, you've published this, we did a whole freaking book on some of this stuff, that even in higher dose chronic studies, that whole process still maxes out, right? Because I can see the next thing online would be, bro, so you need like 3 100-gram, dosing, to maximize this. And it's like, well, at some point chronically, we know that it just kind of maxes out, and maybe you'll eke out a little bit more if you're using a higher dose. We don't know. But I suspect that long-term chronically, I don't think we're going to see massive amount of muscle on more people. I do think it does probably give you more flexibility. The caveat being you still need to hit probably that total gram dose per day. And then the other last 2 things that were fascinating, there was no change in autophagy. So all these people running around saying that protein is going to stop autophagy and you need to fast for 86 hours and all this stuff, there's no change in autophagy in the study at all, even though they had 12 hours post-consumption of anything. So they're fasting for that period of time. And then there was a change in actually some markers of collagen use in soft tissue markers. And even though they did not give collagen, I found that was fascinating. I found an older study that had looked at it and found the same thing. But it kind of makes sense that if your muscle is remodeling, your body is going to try to keep homeostasis and keep some balance in that, extracellular matrix and the soft tissue and all these other components are probably still going to be upregulated a little bit too. So I found that part was super interesting also.
That's cool. And I do, even though I'm saying, homeostasis ruins a lot of these really complex, formulae and tapestries that these gurus put together. Like you said, there's still trends over time. I couldn't agree more. They do tend to get washed out. I mean, I'm not a big fan of plant proteins by themselves. And yet, when you look over time, I mean, acutely, they just don't stand up to like the dairy proteins. And
especially
then
dose, if you equate dose, yeah.
Yeah, or you match leucine, or there's lots of control issues,
Yep.
But yeah, over time, I've seen papers that actually, the gains weren't much different, and I don't know. Maybe this is just getting older and getting like fatigue, fatigue with reduction of science. There is no magic plan. It kind of comes back to what we were saying about the artificial sweeteners: is what fits into your lifestyle, what can you handle better. I mean, there's no way I'm going to cap my protein intake at 30 grams. I'm like, based on my age, I think it's 30 grams. I mean, if there's a big steak in front of me, that's 120 grams of protein, giant, 2 steaks. I don't know. I'm taking it in,
and that's the problem I always had. And that's like Mike's saying, maybe this will lead the opposite way. Because for the longest time, there was that crowd that like, your body just can't use more than 20 to 30 grams at a time.
Right.
Oh, right.
It's like, I've never shit out like 12 of my 16 ounces of steak.
Yeah.
It's going somewhere, buddy.
Yeah. That's right. Damn right. Yeah. All right. Well, that's enough nerd talk. Let's go to break. We'll come back and we'll talk about some other stuff. Hey, everybody. Iron Radio is back and in an expanded way.
What can you expect? Well, first, you can get it simulcast every week on the nutritionradio.org network as well as on the original podcast. It'll appear regularly on iTunes, Spotify, and all your favorite podcasting sites. We have a new Iron Radio / Nutrition Radio Facebook page as well. Please check us out. We're even backed up on YouTube. We hope that an expanded presence will get you the news, education, banter, and guests that's made Iron Radio's community so loyal from the start. You are appreciated.
And we're back on Iron Radio here. And the topic of the day is, it's kind of the impact of social media. It's probably a bunch of old people ranting and grumbling once again, but I'm the one who am liable for this topic because with the new protein study, it was great. Like I saw tons of people share it, and the thing I liked is it was super cool to see attribution to the author, because if you read the study, and the study was published in friggin' Cell magazine or journal, like the top tier, like the Super Bowl for nerds of, publications. Massive study, extremely expensive. I can't imagine the amount of work that went into it. There's a whole team that helped with it. So it was cool to see science kind of making the rounds. But the thing that also drove me bonkers at the same time was it was either everybody just kind of parroting everybody else and just kind of the people who were sort of, for lack of a better word, popular people just kind of agreeing with all of it. And I know like some of the researchers in this area, I'm sure they read the study. I'm not necessarily talking about them, but it was just kind of the same thing you see on social media now all the time of either, oh, I definitely agree with this person. Oh, please like me. I want to be popular. And then you have the inverse of, oh, so-and-so is full of shit. I don't like them. This is horrible. And it's not a critique about a subject matter. It's usually just a video of them talking about how much this other person is just stupid.
Yeah, like personal attack.
Right.
Great. That's great.
Yeah.
I see that in politics. I see that in
it's
all
everywhere.
kinds, right? Yeah, they want to attack someone, or they want to follow. Or I talked about before we were recording today, everybody, like movie reviews are like that. Like if the right person says this is a hit, it influences everybody downstream.
Oh, yeah.
And because they want, like Mike said, they want to get a little bit of the attention or the fame of that person. Ideally, even a nod from them. Holy grail, actual acknowledgement. And that's the problem with social media, is this bandwagon effect. I mean, I was literally in elementary school and they were teaching us about different marketing. And one of them was the bandwagon effect. I still remember like when everybody is saying one thing, it tends to pull you in that direction, And then people start value signaling, and science isn't about value signaling, or there's nothing wrong with saying, oh, you found one thing, I found another. That's interesting. It's just very neutral, not like, and I'm not saying everybody agrees. I'm saying sometimes, like you said, Mike, personal attack, they're just contrarian,
Yeah.
Well, because it makes them feel important or courageous or whatever it is. Oh, that's bullshit. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, more exhaustion for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the definition of our society right now. It's like
very
everything that's
polarized.
popular in this field is via social media and stuff. I mean, look at everything that's come up and come down. It's a giant media push. What do we latch on to now? For a while it was CBD. For a while it was this. For a while it was that. And it gets 7,000 influencers behind it. And I don't know, it's turned the fitness world into much how any arts has been. Like the difference between a band that makes it and a band that doesn't make it is some dude or lady liked them. And that's how you made it. It doesn't mean they're a better band. There's great bands out there that nobody's ever heard of. It's definitely found its way into the fitness and nutrition market, largely due to media and social media.
Yeah, Mike, did you see that? Was that X or Facebook? Where are you seeing all the, social people caving?
Most of it was on Instagram, so that's where most of my stuff is. I did logged back into Twitter as of a week ago. I still call it Twitter, X, whatever. More just or less to see what's going on. And I do know a lot of academics, like the only way I can reach them is via Twitter. So I did it through that end, which has been okay, but I don't know, me personally, I think Twitter is the same as it ever was, if not worse. I couldn't be on there for more than like 10 minutes and I wanted to pull my hair completely out, so I turned it off again.
Yeah.
You can see how they take the exact same summary, like the bullet points that people use, like the phrasing, but they would post it as their own, and that's the part that kind of just drove me nuts. It's like if you're sharing someone else's thing, okay, great, whatever, that's cool. At least you're showing attribution to the person who did it. But when everyone has the exact same opinion with the exact same 3 bullet points all the time, I get kind of suspect.
Yes, Mike, I'd ask a question to really all of you. Name how many, we'll say, more on the science side influencers that are like truly popular, like kind of big time names, would you say are actually in like the science field or actually doing science or speak as a scientist as opposed to, I don't know, I would just call it like kind of the pop science culture of podcasts where it's like they do something, like they have some science related field they work in, but then they kind of just speak in a lot of like absolutes and kind of sell or pitch a whole thing. Mm-hmm. So who would you say is out there strength and fitness wise that's like actually big?
That do you think is doing it more based on actual science?
Yeah, that's like actually like truly has like a ton of followers or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, someone asked me this the other day and I was like, man, I don't know, because I don't follow a ton of people. Like I can only speak for people I know personally. Like I work with, Dr. Andy Galpin and Dan Garner at Rapid Health. So I love all their stuff. I've known them personally for a long time. But their stuff is great. I've stayed at Andy's house multiple times before. I mean, Huberman has some really good stuff and then has some stuff that I kind of shake my head. I haven't listened to the Robert Lustig interview yet, which I know as someone who's interviewed people is very difficult. I just listened to a few clips of it. And to Huberman's credit, he did try to get clarifying questions in, but the response just avoided the question multiple times. So that's kind of a weird area where I get it. You're an interview. This person is doing you a favor by doing the interview and you're trying to get a better answer, but you don't want to completely roast them either. I mean, obviously I know the guys at Renaissance Periodization, Jeff Nippert, who does his own stuff. There's probably other people. Like the one guy who texted me, I told him, like, just send me a name and I can probably give you an opinion, but I'm so not following what's popular. Probably the worst person to ask, unfortunately.
Good point, because I was just thinking that too. I'm like, how could I possibly respond to drill? Like, because I've purposely just shit canned social media, Facebook, Insta, can't stand it. Never TikToked in my life. When jobs say, hey, what's your LinkedIn page? I give them my ResearchGate page. I'm that much of a nerd,
Yeah.
But, which doesn't have much of a reach. But the name that comes to my mind is Stu Phillips, right? When it comes to muscle,
great. Yeah,
resistance training, protein, strength, his lab and all those surrounding labs, because he's sort of the modern, arguably most famous outgrowth of the Pete Lemon, Duncan McDougall, Digby Sale, all those guys who are about resistance training and protein and all that kind of stuff.
Brett Schoenfeld always does good stuff.
He's very productive. He's currently publishing. He knows his shit. He's the kind of person who would correct a lot of for the dietitian level type of people. I'm not saying there aren't PhD level dietitians, but the usual practitioner types. But and at the same time, he does like the attention.
So is he? Mike, I don't know, but is he very active on social media? I mean,
I think so.
But, I think so.
Yeah,
I was gonna say most usually a huge red flag for me in the training side. Like if a so-called strength coach is putting up 25 posts a day.
Oh yeah.
It's you're not fucking doing it. There's no way you're
not actually doing it.
Yeah. same on the science side. Like if you're actually doing science, you don't have time to be on social media 6 hours a day.
I would argue Stu manages to do both.
Yeah.
He's super productive, and I just think, like I said, he likes, well, who wouldn't? Likes a little bit of the attention and the fame and being an expert in the field, and so he'll do stuff like. And to Mike's point, like I don't think he's all over all social media, making that like his side gig.
Not his main thing. Yeah.
A follow up to that is like what Phil was saying. I just ran into somebody, last week in Texas, and they post a ton of stuff about like weightlifting training and all that stuff. And I asked, I was like, oh, and I thought he was, still coaching. And he was like, oh, no, I have one person I coach.
Yeah.
I was like, oh,
wow.
Okay. And it wasn't even like in weightlifting anymore, which was, interesting to me. And I've just started seeing a lot of that. But the other follow up to that is like, how much of it is, because Dr. Israel from RP, he stands out to me as like probably like a truly really popular person in this field. And I was going to follow up just with how much of it is like our delivery on like how we, put ourselves out there and kind of promote or speak the message or whatever. And one of the big things that Mike does is like basically make fun of celebrity workouts. You know what I mean? Like he's kind of bought into some of the, social media shtick stuff more so than the actual, stuff he produces and puts out. So I wonder how much of it is like the science field or like a more serious field, not really putting in the time, effort, and energy into the like delivery and the presentation and the game of social media.
In fact, let me ask you this, Mike, because I mean, you're on social media more than I am, just almost blanket not, but Huberman and Israel, do they publish regularly in peer-reviewed journals? Are they the kind of guys that do that, or not so much?
Yeah, so I think there's a handful of academics where you're kind of the top person in the lab. I don't want to say it's easy because it's definitely not, but it's easier than if you're the low-level person that's executing all the work all the time.
Yeah,
and that's not any. That's no disrespect to those people at all. They went through, God, how many decades of doing all that work themselves to get to where they're at. So it's not a diss against them, but it does give you a little bit more freedom to do other things. Mm-hmm. And I would put Dr. Andy Galpin in the same thing. I mean, obviously very busy. All of them are running a lab. Huberman's still running a lab. Stu's running a lab. But it gives you a little bit more freedom to move things around. So I think you do have a little bit more time. So Huberman's still publishing a fair amount of stuff. Israel, I think he's just teaching a little bit on the side and then just doing stuff with RP. I haven't seen that he's really published anything since his doctoral work, which again, having done studies, I can kind of understand why if you're not in that area anymore. Mm-hmm. It's a monster pain in the ass. There's no incentive. You don't get paid anything for it. And then if you have a company behind you like RP, and I know Nick and all those guys there, that is kind of your job, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at what Israel does, like he doesn't do a lot of podcasts. And when I asked him, he's just like, I don't really think it's worth my time when I can do a video and get, so many more views on it directly. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, that's fair. That makes sense to me. It's also kind of a weird area too, because you're then going to be asked to step outside of your area of expertise the more content you produce. And I know Huberman has got some heat for this too, and to his credit, did hire another guy to kind of fact check and try to peer review everything that he's doing to try to make sure it is accurate. But it's always going to be hard because you're going to get questions outside of that. And if you're doing a 3-hour podcast a week, you kind of have to come up with stuff to do another 3-hour podcast a week. And you can do interviews and just, leverage other experts. Or you can do like the Israel and you can do critique videos. I actually watched a couple of those critique videos. They were actually pretty entertaining. It was actually done in a pretty decent way. I think they're much better now than they used to be. But I even know for myself, it's just like, God, what area do I stay in? In some areas, I know the amount of time and effort it's going to take me to be somewhat proficient in it. And it's probably just not not worth it, right? Or if I have a background in one area already, I can spend a day or two, I can get up to date on the literature, and then it's not too bad. But, one of them, I'm doing a PowerPoint series on red light stuff that I've been reading for, probably 6 years now, and I'm almost done with it. And in hindsight, this has taken me an ungodly amount of time. And the amount of references that'll never show up in that PowerPoint is insane.
Right.
Just because they didn't fit in. It would have been easier to just be like, hey, here's what it's good for and useful for. But again, that's not accurate either. So I don't know if I even answered your question.
It's a good point, I think, Jarrell, that production values and entertainment value are a big deal. There are pure academics that put stuff out occasionally. You can find it on social media, but it's not meant to have high production value. I mean,
no.
Even Iron Radio, these are weekly conversations we just have. Like, we are not, unlike what Mike just said, like, I don't think most people realize when it comes to academic papers and the amount of work into what you get out is preposterous. You might read 100 papers looking for those gold nugget quotes or data points. And also you can write like half a paragraph. It's so frustrating. Even when Phil and I were back in the heyday of Team Nation and Biotest and all that, what I did with Kelly afterwards, she's like, God, it takes you twice as long just to go through your little 30 references, and since then they ditched all that. I was doing like kind of state of the art, like, here's the little miniature lit review with some fun editorial, but yeah, there is that sort of magical combination of someone who they are trained enough, I would argue graduate training of some kind, to read the science and then make it fun enough that it's appealing, to, let's say, a student or a science enthusiast. But there is kind of a difference between a science popularizer and someone that's their job. Their job is to be a researcher.
And to Phil's point and Jarrell's point too, like, especially on the training side, like, I'm good friends with Cal Dietz. I'm obviously helping him write a book, but he's so friggin' busy, like, training people and training his pros and his college athletes. Like, I barely talk to him, and like, we're doing a book together, and I've known him for 14 years and was down there at the U of M when he was there and stuff. So I know his material really well, and I can basically interpret it probably pretty good just because of all that time. But even with him, I'm trying to hopefully in the future be like, hey, I'll help you with the distribution of material and getting all your stuff out there. I don't care at all. I don't want any credit for it, because I know that for him to do that on his own is a major time sink, but yet he has so much amazing info that he's tested for years on actual athletes, because this is literally all he's been doing of decades of his life. But that doesn't leave him time to do lots of distribution of information either. So my proposal to him is hopefully, hey, can I help you distribute your material better, because you just don't have time. So I think there's a lot of coaches like that, and we could go down a list of name a whole bunch of them, that they're so busy training and doing stuff in the trenches that they don't have time to do like TikTok videos or whatever.
And it does become kind of a shame when only a couple hundred people even see these gold nuggets. They can be life-changing things. God, back since 2009, we've talked about this on the show, haven't we? Like, we actually have day jobs, and Iron Radio is not the totality of what we're doing. And it's sort of cranking and lamenting, but there's truth to it too, because damn, and it's a good point, Mike, that if someone doesn't promulgate the information, it could just kind of go to waste. That's kind of my critique with all the work with academic papers. And Mike, you and I, we've even done position papers, which become these huge, almost like a book chapter. And so a couple hundred people, can see it. Maybe if you're lucky, a couple of thousand. And the older you get, the harder. I don't want to sound mercenary, but I know, Mike, you think the same way. It's like, I don't know. It didn't pay my mortgage. It didn't, I don't, at my age, I don't want a pat on the head for reputation. So,
Now, the position stand I did on caffeine took 3 years between when we started and when we finished. And my wife Jody rightfully told me I'm not doing that again anytime
Yeah.
soon, and I would 100% agree.
Absolutely. Forbidden. What are you doing?
Exactly. And she's 100% correct.
Yeah. And to Mike's defense and mine, they bake that into you in school. Like,
Oh yeah.
you know,
the academic guilt.
yeah, when you get the diploma, all the rights and responsibilities thereof, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I don't disagree with some of those oaths, I guess, but yeah, at some point you have to issue a cut your losses kind of order, you know, like, enough. I'm too much of a sink here. You know?
Yeah. And then it goes back to, what are you trying to do? You know, because I always think, even like Phil was saying with coaching clients, like, I've lost track of how many marketing consults I've had where they're like, why are you still training people online? Like, it's taking a bunch of your time. Nobody really knows you do it because it's barely ever open because your clients are full. You should just stop doing that. And I'm like, yeah, you know, from an income standpoint and the time and everything else and the headache, I just don't want to ever be one of those people that's never coaching anyone currently, you know, and being like, hey, this is what I do. It's like, no, it's not what you do. You're not training anyone. And the reality, would some of the advice I give change a whole lot at this point in my life? Probably not. But it's just that whole, it's kind of like the academic thing. Like, I feel guilty turning down peer reviews because I just feel like it's what I'm supposed to do as an academic, although no one even knows that I do them other than the peer reviewer person who sent it to me. Like, you don't get any public, yay, your name doesn't even show up anywhere.
Amen to that. Yeah.
But I just feel like that's part of the gig and what you should do. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right.
I feel like I'm just being Mr. Cranky the whole day.
Yeah. I know. But, you know, we live in an age of independent publishers. We talked about that. There's no gatekeeper editors anymore and all that kind of stuff. Everybody has to make their own decision and be skeptical when they see all the social media stuff. Be aware of the bandwagon effect and all of the, you know, social hierarchy crap that goes on. And anyway,
yeah, the pro is that if someone is new to the industry and does have, you know, good experience, that there isn't a gatekeeper. They can get their information, for better or worse, out there.
Right. Yeah.
In the
Pros
past,
and cons.
there was only a handful of people, and if they didn't like you for whatever reason, even if you were well qualified, had good experience, etc., it was much harder to get your message out. We're now,
right,
we're the inverse of that, where anyone can get their message out, whether they're qualified or not. But I think it does make it easier for people who do have the qualifications and have been doing it for all the right reasons, you know, to have the potential to get started. It's just a little bit longer, kind of a exponential type thing. And that's my last plug, is why I do a newsletter, is because I realized that I can then control my own distribution channel. And I finally got my Instagram account back to do ads, and the first ad I run, I told people not to do zone 2 cardio, do this instead, and it gets blocked and my account's flagged again. So, and I'm like, they said I was putting out disruptive content. I'm like, what? You know, so
you rebel, Mike.
Have a newsletter, you know. So I think it's easier for people to start their own distribution channels now too.
Well, you've seen that a lot more. So.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
Well, happy Christmas, everybody. Yeah.
Merry holidays, everybody. Yep. Everybody have a good time. I'm gonna go do the usual, train.
I'm going to go eat more than 100 grams of protein.
There you go. You're going to crap out a steak.
There you go. I doubt it.
So, all right, guys.
See ya.
See ya.
Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.